Since the late 2010s, there has been a groundswell of excitement and expansion for Battletech, a game of armored combat, the likes of which has not been seen since the late 80s and early 90s proportionately. A disjointed effort by multiple entities around the franchise has participated greatly in the resurgence of this once again powerful franchise in tabletop wargaming. Companies like Piranha Games and Harebrained Schemes breathed life into the video games, while Catalyst Game Labs kept the tabletop side of the IP on life support, at least until their incredibly successful Clan Invasion and Mercenaries Kickstarters brought the property back into the mainstream. This is also to say nothing of content creators like the Black Pants Legion and other creators like Critical Rocket providing enormously entertaining and informative videos on the subject during this extended time as well. With this functional resurrection in recent years, not only have veterans of the setting once more returned, following their nav points back to the battlefield, but a wave of new people has come with them. For those wanting to delve into the world of Battletech and Mechwarrior, there may be, unfortunately, a few hurdles at this exact time. Many resources of old, the foundations of the setting, are either difficult to find and long out of print, sometimes even being intermixed with old scenarios or rules, or are novels and sourcebooks that may not present the information on board in the most understandable way without context. Sometimes it may even simply be overwhelming for anyone to look at too, while they try to figure out even where to begin, as they are faced with potentially dozens or hundreds of books to grasp this world of armored fighting machines. While community resources like Sarna exist, these aren't official, and even may still struggle to give coherent perspective of the setting, or may require reading many disparate pages to pull together a broad idea of what Battletech is at the time of a specific story or era. Catalyst Game Labs and its staff, having seen Harebrained Schemes' Battletech's opening cinematic, which is honestly one of the best introductions to the setting in the franchise's history, became inspired, and over the course of several years, they have crafted a new primer, a new tome, that is designed to engross returning Mechwarriors and newcomers alike. It is a book built to answer the question, where do I begin? Within its pages lay the skeleton of the setting, the foundations of what it is. It was important to get this source book right, more so than any other book released by CGL. Really, in the entire history of the company, the current stewards of the franchise. I had purchased this book itself, both in its normal form and in its special edition form, the Precentor Martial Edition, as a part of my Battletech Mercenaries Kickstarter pledge, and patiently awaited my copies like everyone else to see if this book lived up to my expectations. Fate would have it that Catalyst reached out to me and several others regarding a review copy of this very much important publication. As you can guess from this video, I've agreed to do a review of it. As I mentioned, I had literally already purchased these anyway, and to have the opportunity to answer my own questions regarding it, while informing all of you, sooner rather than later, was an opportunity I opted to not pass on. So, within this video lays the most significant book review I have ever done, for what I personally believe, in terms of its importance to the community that follows Battletech, is meant to be the most serious and critical piece released for it in this century so far. I'm even nervous to make this video, truth be told. Battletech universe is extraordinarily important for understanding the lore in almost every major respect, and to inform and wow players into understanding the enormous world created by FASA 40 years ago. So come join me here in this extensive overview, and let's see if this book hits the mark, as I examine the presentation, lore, physical attributes, and overall book as a whole. Welcome to the Battletech Universe Overview. Before we get started, I just wanted to put this here. rather than at the end of the video. But I was not paid to do this review, and received nothing beyond the review copies to do so. There were also no prerequisites given to me to cover this book, beyond just to do a review of it in any way I deemed fit. Alright, we got that out of the way. Now let's actually get started, shall we? In my introduction, I gave a bit of an insight into what this book is, but I'm going to lay it out a bit more clearly here. Even with everything I'd said before, this is the most difficult book I've ever had to do a survey on. Not because of it being complicated, but just because it's very different from any novel or source book that I've looked at for the channel prior. While it is a form of primer, an introduction to the setting in essence, it is also something inherently more than that just at its core. Prior to touching on any of the portions of the book itself, it does spend several pages going just over what it really is meant to be. The book is a gateway into the setting. A direct line from it really does give full clarity on that. In these pages, we emphasize coverage over depth, choosing to give space to as many different elements of the Battletech setting as we possibly could, rather than doing a deep dive into just a handful. Our intention is to provide as wide a view of this universe as possible, so that everyone will find a faction, historical period, or prominent individual that they want to learn more about. In essence, this title, Universe, is about providing the absolute base of information needed to understand the world of Mechwarrior and Battletech. It even goes a step further than that, as it does blend an enormous amount of information into it, covering a series of subjects that are connected, but with elements that are still wildly different from one another. As an introductory book, you might expect it to brush past some of the key technologies in universe, but no, these essential components of the property are tackled in this tome as well. So, beyond what you've already gleaned from my insight so far, what is Battletech Universe? I'll let the book speak for itself one more time. All of this rich lore you'll find in Battletech Universe is wrapped in what we believe is the most spectacular layout for any source book in Battletech's 40-year history. Our layout and production team has truly outdone themselves, and each page offers a symphony of art and text to fuel your imagination. With that, your dropship is waiting to depart and bring you into a universe of pulse-pounding action and sweeping drama. It's time to see what's out there. The future awaits. And that is the book's final word to its introduction. And from here, I'm going to start going over the book in the way it deserves. Beyond just explaining what it's intended to be, I'm going to start by looking over the core construction and implementation of the book's presentation itself. Does it live up to what this introduction says? Battletech Universe, being a sourcebook produced by Catalyst Game Labs, comes as a successor to more recent publications in terms of its appearance, wording, and how it delivers information. One thing any reasonable person will note is most CGL mainstream sourcebooks tend to be decent to high quality, and I say that specifically not addressing the source material content inside of them, I should point out. So, books like Ilclan, Tomorrow Rising, Empire Alone, and Dominions Divided come with more than just words on a page. How is that information broken down? What images are added and where? These all play into how the reader digests the information put in front of them. Images in particular can relay information text can't, or will be used to enhance the written content nearby by giving it an atmosphere or tone. This is common in the construction of any sourcebook, and there are very good reasons for it. From my own observations, I noticed right away that the Battletech Universe book is more of a refinement of the more recent styles of books from CGL, at least in my opinion. Using the armor and weapons pages as an example, more specifically page 24, even if blurred for the purposes of this review, you can see a bit of what I mean in terms of how the information is put on display. Larger, colored text indicates the subject that is being overviewed, with the paragraphs following beneath it explaining the subject matter in question, before a diagram, along with additional information tagged to each component, is conveyed on the same page. This is done very well. Minimal page space is spent, especially in the opening headline, and everything that is put forward will in fact catch your eye while properly conveying the necessary facts. I know, it's shocking, but the people at Catalyst seem to be quite good at figuring out image placement, what needs to be added to enhance the words themselves, and how to best convey the data points they want to the reader in order to fully inform them. The rest of the book is very much the same. Sometimes text will be splashed over a single large image. Other times, images will be half displayed, with more stories and information imposed next to them, or on top of them. The book feels like it's high quality because of this. I never struggled to figure out what was happening while reading it, though I would advise you to take from that what you will, given that I have followed the setting for 30 years. Much like prior releases, and as you'd expect, Battletech Universe contains a series of maps, displaying the various eras, and the borders of the main contenders in the Inner Sphere. These are all superb, and definitely feel like a bonus, especially given how some of these eras have much more dated maps from much more dated sourcebooks. The newer examples of stellar cartography made by CGL over the years have been a huge facelift, and seeing them on display, in really their highest quality yet, visually, in this book, is a great plus. What I'm saying is, basically, it's the little things that help elevate this book's overall delivery. There are splash pages before each major section of the book as well, giving an indication to the era or major point of discussion. An abundance of new art was created in order to make Battletech Universe, as far as I can tell. For example, there are new shots of Myomers, various equipment, and different events. Just as frequently, however, was the usage of a host of reused images for various sections, and that was always to be expected, at least by me. Though it is important for me to add, some of the older art can feel a bit out of place in comparison to the newer pieces. There is, however, limits on the amount of art that can be made for one book, but it is somewhat noticeable in some shots. Overall, I think the layout is the best they've done so far, and this likely stems from just how long this book was worked on. Their prior products are displayed very well too in this regard, just to be clear, but this really is a cut above the Ilclan sourcebooks, if only because of the care to small details and the very obvious care and consideration placed in how each page was crafted. So, with all of that done, let's get into the muscle and fat of this book. Likely what I'm sure you were all hoping that I'd discuss off the bat. The main content within this thing's pages. This is definitely going to be the hardest portion for me to cover, not because the information within is flawed in any way, but because this video is not just going to be me reading like hundreds of pages of history and simply reiterating all of them here verbatim. Instead, this is a review of the history as it is portrayed within the book. Yes, I'll be mentioning the events themselves to some extent, but really this is about the book rather than all of its contents. The history section makes up the majority of this tome too, spanning from the single digits of the pages all the way through to the high hundreds. We, the Lord Representative of the 6 inner realms of the human sphere, in the name of peace, free commerce, and our people, do hereby enter the covenant to be henceforth be known as the Star League. We pledge unto each other our lives, our good faith, and our sacred honor. Excerpt from the Preamble to the Star League Accords, 2571. The opening of the history of the universe of Battletech starts with the title of the Star League, and this is fitting, given that its history really starts to be unlocked with the Star League in the eyes of many. Interestingly, the opening of this saga is actually about events, discoveries, and innovations prior to the formation of the League itself by some time. In other words, it falls into the era known as the Age of War. The Age of War is in all probability the least explored corner of the setting, so tying the expansion of mankind into the stars into the Star League really does make sense. But this chapter does more or less unite the two eras into one, with the first portion of the Star League era being referred to as the Age of War. In other words, this whole section is functionally the ancient history of Mechwarrior, more than just the Star League's era by itself. Things begin with the 21st century and the discovery of the Kearney-Fushida theories, which led to the KF drive, and so this goes over the importance of jump technology and its role in the world. The book also discusses why humanity, as a whole, started to move towards the heavens as a result of this new technology, and the social elements behind this, before even digging into the First Interstellar War. This is because it really goes over the change in, well, everything as centuries pass. Fusion engines, much like KF drives, are vital to Battletech, in that they power almost all major war machines and much of the industries in the setting. And these too are touched on, long before the book reaches into the broader history of this early part of the setting. This is the part of the book that really goes over the foundations of everything. In other words, it goes over what makes Battletech Battletech. Things really start picking up when it starts to dive into the periphery and inner sphere, including where these terms come from and why they are in place, before exploring the basics of the Age of War and why the Ares Convention originally appeared. It also, of course, goes over the Terran Hegemony and Great Houses, or as they would later be known, the Successor States. It even goes into, in very basic terms, why neo-feudalism came about in the first place. This is all done before technology comes up once more, going over the logistics of the inner sphere through space travel, but also delving into the real center of the setting, at least as far as weapons and technology goes. Given the number of pages available for going over deep subjects, it is very well put together in how it describes technology coalescing into the military mainstay hardware of the setting. It hit me then that my colleagues and I had just turned loose one of the most powerful weapons ever conceived by man, but we were all celebrating like giddy children, while my companions jumped up and down with glee. That poor boy was trying to hide the fact that in the instant his screen went to black, he had wet his pants. Hegemony Research and Development Department Military Weapons Systems Division. Eyes Only. Report from 2439.02.05. The descent into the technology and internals of Battlemechs and their history is fantastic. It starts with industrial mechs and then expands, of course, into the full deal. There is a cross-section of an atlas within its pages, showing a cutaway of the internals and just how these mechs are put together, and I absolutely love it. But the description of the advancement of technology and the arms race appearing, led by the Terrans, is a great way to understand so much of how things just work in Battletech. It's a story of the science-military-industrial complex creating a revolution in weaponry. Much like when the HMS Dreadnought first appeared, it invalidated basically all other prior naval vessels of its age. In this case, the revolution didn't just include mechs, however. but includes the arsenal of weapons that with time would appear throughout Battletech. Naturally, Universe touches on proliferation in its own subchapter, which fittingly goes to show the kind of world Battletech was and is, and indirectly showing why conflict can never really be resolved. This entire section of history then takes a look at another pillar of Battletech, the Mechwarriors themselves. Universe gives a great breakdown of the quality, background, historical societal placement of these warriors, and the role that they take within the military. Still, it also gives a gateway into, once more, why things are the way they are. It's titled, The New Knighthood, for a reason. At this stage, I really want to point out, of the prior sections I just briefly remarked on, these, to me, are all things I wouldn't have necessarily expected to see in an area called the Star League. And of course, I have not expanded on all of these subjects to the degrees that they are examined within the book. This is really to give you a taste of what lays within these pages. Overall, I'm really happy and impressed with the descriptions within, and the range of things that have been covered. It is important to note too, however, as another aside, that they reaffirmed the appearance of the original neural helmet, which is more or less a garbage can locked over someone's head. And while the updated artwork for it is wonderfully crafted, I hold this visual concept in contempt, and can express nothing but derision for it. Now that that is out of the way, the rest of this section is what you would expect. That is, of course, showing the journey into the formation of the Star League, its golden age, and its fall. At the start of this adventure, it gives the reader the opening into the key events around what took place. Yes, if you read a dedicated sourcebook like the Star League, it will give you a massively deeper understanding of events. But this book, as mentioned in the beginning, isn't meant to do that. You will be informed as to what created the conditions for the Star League to be formed, and the key events around it. The prosperity of an empire spanning across all of human space, an empire with faster-than-light communications, as well as the ability to purify water at scale, and economic prosperity is what's covered in the Golden Age that follows. The SLDF gets an examination too, and one which in my view kind of cements my vision of it as being nothing more than an arm of the Terran Hegemony, but that was just my takeaway. Without getting too deep into this, the book tackles the collapse of the Terran hegemony at the hands of Stefan Amaris, the coup itself, the civil war it sparked, the end of the Star League, as well as the exodus from the Inner Sphere after the implosion of the Star League by the remnants of the SLDF. This is, in my view, really the most vital chapter for the book to tackle and get right. It's from here that all other information within the tome depends upon, whether that be in the form of the technology, the key players in the universe, both as nation-states and historical figures, or just the key events that set in motion the greater conflicts that are played out on the tabletop by so many. There isn't a specific character or event I felt needed to be added to make this work. People who read this, especially without any foreknowledge, will receive everything they need to get why things happened the way they unfolded in Battletech, and to get the nature of the major conflicts that followed this vital time period. In short, I thought this was very good. I am the descendant of Shiro Kurita, who seized the right of rule and forged the Draconis Combine. In my veins runs the blood of the emperors of Japan, whose imperial house of Yamato is the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy of ancient Terra. What's more, my house alone tested the SLDF, and showed the rot within the League. By what right do we rule? By the right of heritage, which spans 300 centuries. By the right of might, that conquers and expands the glory of the realm, by the dictum honorinium that elevates and enables all the people under the dragon. Join that heritage. Join that legacy. Join that glory. And the Star League shall shine brighter than ever for millennia to come. This I swear. As of this day, the coordinator of the Draconis Combine shall be addressed as First Lord of the Star League. Karita Manumaru. Excerpts from Personal Address, 31st of December, 2786. The more I read this book, the more I realized, bizarrely, that I could understand it beyond the facts it was delivering. I can see how it's been formed and presented, because sincerely, it has a lot in common with how I make videos. The side streets of the first chapter, which for example went over things like the Age of War, expansion of mankind, technology, and Star League, are ever present in the next section of history, i.e., the Succession Wars. Many who know my deeper mech lore videos know I intertwine the history of Battlemechs with the history of various characters, factions, or battles and events that can be attached to the machine. It is very much the same for this book as well. It's an excellent delivery system for lore, but more than that, it helps associate the right moments and eras to broader parts of the overall backstory so that people can then search on their own later for more if they want to. This particular section feels more like it's an exploration of so many of the staples of the Inner Sphere than it is about these core conflicts. And honestly, that's incredibly satisfying in its own way. This is just a quick observation as we get into the Succession Wars part of the history, which opens with a page, not about the war, but about the Blessed Order of Comstar. The Succession Wars are some of the most explored and violent conflicts in human history. They lasted centuries, and saw the regression of mankind into a much more primitive state. The wars themselves, barring the Fourth Succession War, get important, but relative to their size and scope, brief overviews within this section. In other words, they are explored mostly in the broadest of ways. And I personally feel this is the right approach. The Succession Wars could be overwhelming if they were given the massive amount of attention that the developers over decades have put into them. Most certainly the important, key events are all here, from the destruction they wrought, to the technology they lost, to even the futility of these wars in many respects. All the same, these conflicts could never be given a fully stocked, satisfying understanding in this book. Is this a strike against this chapter? In my view, no. There's enough here to help people understand Battletech, its themes, and the universe enough to see their importance. That doesn't mean that this is the most impressive part of the book, or even the chapter on the Succession Wars, however, because what really impressed me about this section is everything else. The exploration of the military organization of the Great Houses is brief, to the point, and is well represented and displayed. There is an interesting and insightful piece of the rise of piracy, which is very well delivered, giving an eye into the occupation of desperate Mechwarriors during the ages that followed the Star League. After this there is even more, much more, but to me, the standout is the rise of neo-feudalism. Discussed earlier to some degree, it is given more teeth in the Succession Wars section, and I loved seeing the family crests of multiple minor lords within the systems coming after the main description. The role of the mercenary, too, begins to rear its frame within this section of the book, as these incredibly important portions of the overall fabric of Battletech are woven into the Succession Wars descriptions. As long as there is war within the Inner Sphere, it will breathe life into this vile trade, as much as it does piracy. Still, I really enjoyed this examination of soldiers of fortune in the Inner Sphere and Periphery. As far as excerpts go, there's a fantastic standout in the Lost Tech portion of the chapter as well, but not as you might imagine. It is called Devolution of a Battlemech, the Thunderbolt. I'm not going to spoil it beyond saying it's a great read, but I will say this helps contextualize exactly what happened to the Inner Sphere and its industries throughout the ravages of the Succession Wars. Also, if you wanted to see an even more terrifyingly barbaric neural helmet, one which makes a Mechwarrior look even more like they're wearing a glorified bucket on their heads, look no further than these pages within the book. I'm definitely more of a fan of the recent depictions of Mechwarrior neural helmets. I'll not lie. The throwback helmets are... well, they're there. There's one last part that I'm intending on going over, and there is plenty that I have not on purpose. The final piece of this puzzle is the Fourth Succession War, and it is given the most attention of all the Succession Wars within this area. It goes as far as to give a breakdown of all of the great house lords from this era, covering Hans Stavian, Katrina Steiner, Kurita Takashi, Liao Maximilian, and Janos Merrick. It also gives the greatest details on the core conflict, providing all that is really needed to know to grasp just how things went down. Wife, in honor of our marriage, in addition to this morsel, I give you a vast prize. My love, I give you the Capellan Confederation! Overall, the chapter is exactly what it needs to be. I genuinely loved the offshoots into other subjects, and most particularly within the Succession Wars chapter. There is in fact tons more I didn't touch on in this portion of the video, as this review is not a play-by-play of everything within the book. This is just to give you an idea of how it's structured, what I enjoyed, and the overall presentation of the material. It is definitely worth the read, from this 40-ish page section alone, especially for new players. We must eradicate all vestiges of the tainted past, so that we can forge ourselves into a people worthy of our destiny. We must kill the traditions that blinded and crippled us for so long, for the old ways are like shackles that hinder our true strength. We are a new people, reborn in fire, and we must follow new ways. Henceforth, our 800 warriors will be divided into 20 clans, and they will no longer fight as lances, companies, battalions, or regiments. Instead, they will enter battle as points, stars, binaries, clusters, and galaxies. Excerpt from the papers of Nicholas Kerensky. Every era of Battletech is incredibly important, but not every era is widely played in. The Star League and Age of War eras, for instance, while most certainly having a following, aren't the eras that see the most play. The same cannot be said for what is the era that is most connected to the rise of the franchise, which is the Clan Invasion. Likely the most played single era of the setting on tabletop. It also has some of the most expansive lore regarding campaigns, characters, and factions overall, as it introduces one of the key components to the game, that being the titular clans. So in other words, this particular portion of the book has a huge amount of legwork to do. It not only has to address the primary protagonists of the era, which is still the great houses of the Inner Sphere, but it also has to properly explore the drivers of this storied era. Revival is the opening chapter, which gives a wide overview of what has happened since the end of the late Succession Wars. More or less, what came to pass after the Helm Memory Corps and War of 3039. It then, quite quickly, descends into the car crash that was the clan's assault on the Inner Sphere, going over their attack, but also over some of their key quirks, and their sense of honor. I will point out there is also more than a few mentions of Phelan Kell, including his own microbiography. The history and culture of the clans are covered here for obvious reasons, going over their founding and their ways of life. It's presented as fairly as possible, without getting too sidetracked by some of the more eccentric elements of the clans and their development. Crusaders and Wardens, politically, are also briefly touched on as well. Much like the Succession Wars chapter, there are great side roads in this portion of the book too, exploring things like trials, Zelbringen, and the clan's military structure. One of the most important things this part of the book does, and does well, is go over the clan's technology, much like the Succession Wars section had prior. The reason, of course, being the clan tech is one of the biggest impacts the clans themselves had on the setting, both in the video games and in the tabletop. It really helps contextualize just what made the clans so sophisticated in comparison to their peers from the Inner Sphere, through just their general equipment, but also with omnimechs and battle armor, including the social elements of how this technology is viewed by the clans themselves. But nearing the end of this portion, there is dedicated room given to Tukiid, the most important battle of the era, as well as the key personalities who commanded the forces on both sides. It spends several pages going over the battle, which in this format is very significant, and does a fantastic job doing so. While it doesn't have every detail, obviously if you want there are Tukiid dedicated source books for a reason. The book still provides the best information of the campaign I could reasonably have expected. Once more, to anyone new, or who hasn't followed the battle in depth, this is a great introduction to it. Like with the Succession Wars overview, this section really works for what it is. I was pleasantly surprised by the depth of certain portions of it, and enjoyed the presentation once more. There's plenty more within the clan invasion part of all of this too, from the beginnings of the Word of Blake to the later years of the invasion era, which are all delivered in the same fashion as you'd come to expect by now. This entire piece, much as the previous two, does everything it needs to. None of us wish to see more conflict, but we can no longer ignore the problems plaguing us. Now we must live with the results, however painful, as we acknowledge the irreconcilable differences that continue to divide my sister from me. It is no longer possible for me to stand back in the interests of peace. The time has come, my people, where no other choice remains. None but war. Broadcast made by Victor Steiner Davian, December 8th, 3062, to the people of the former Federated Commonwealth. Truly the shortest era of the setting, the FedCom Civil War suitably has one of the shorter sections in the book. An era about division and destruction, it first lays the groundwork for it by addressing the Federated Commonwealth, before delving into what divided the mighty realm, and its inevitable spiral into violence and destruction. So, with that said, what do I think about it? The opening about the Commonwealth was really well done, and to the point. It immediately began to explain what fragmented the once central state of the Inner Sphere and storyline, in the form of Operation Guerrero, before expanding on, ironically, events and figures within the Capellan Confederation, a nation which is often overlooked in terms of its military successes. Then things take off with the primary information on the FedCom Civil War. The breakdown here is good, and clearly defines the events as they took place. Catherine undermining Victor, as well as his role in the state prior to his departure to the battle with the clans, and then things follow up with the Civil War and its aftermath. Significantly more detail is provided than I'm covering here, as well as a more thorough explanation of events, I should add. There are also breakdowns of both Victor Steiner-Davian and Catherine Steiner-Davian as characters in their own small microbiographies. The only real sidestep in all of this that moves away from explaining the plot of this section of the story is a great piece on interstellar corporations and their roles within Battletech. In its entirety, this is probably my least enjoyed part of Battletech universe, but not because it's badly comprised or anything of the sort. It's perfectly serviceable and does indeed provide all the facts needed to understand the FedCom Civil War. It's just, the FedCom Civil War, for me, is an era I've never really enjoyed. Hopefully, however, people new to the setting, or even those who enjoy it, will find a lot to love here.
All of history is a river, driven by currents of inertia that few can resist, that fewer can still even hope to comprehend. Great men are those who can see the currents and navigate them to glory, but only a true master can find a way to tame the currents themselves, to use history's own momentum as an instrument of true change. Merely jumping in front of history is not enough, but neither is facing it head-on. No matter how strong the personality, the current will simply wash away those who surrender to it, and erode away those who fight it. All our preparations, all our efforts, have led to this day, the day of our reckoning. But is it enough? It has to be enough. Though the names have changed, and the villains have changed, the outcome has to be no less than history demanded. In the ashes of war, we shall find our vindication. Blake's will be done.
Attributed to Thomas, the Master, Merrick, in his final days, 3081. It is really no easy task to summarize the Blakist Era of Battletech, first constructed narratively, without really the full details as a justification for the Mechwarrior Dark Age Clicks game, even if based off events that had been planned at a smaller scale prior. This era has received a series of major updates over the decades since it was first introduced. With that said, how does it fare as a chapter? This section really does give an appropriate overview of the conflict, both in its origins and in its viciousness. The Blakist Era is truthfully the Fifth Succession War more than any other conflict, or it could ironically be seen as some kind of twisted continuation of the Reunification War, though I think the former fits more so. Events are spelled out clearly, and the destruction from the conflict is given attention at scale. Really, this part of the book focuses on the chaos of the era, as much as the major events of it. To give some brief insights into the texts within the book, here are a few examples. The Blakist machinations accomplished what over 300 years of civil and succession wars could not. A successor state had fallen. Periphery nations usually weather the wars of the Inner Sphere untouched. Not so with the Blakist Era. The Taurian Concordat was goaded into attacking the Federated Suns. The chaos of wholesale destruction gripped the Inner Sphere. Factories became targets for obliteration rather than capture. Attackers burned what they could not haul off as booty. The Word of Blake was not the only perpetrators of such wanton destruction. All of this is really best viewed as the rise and fall of the Word of Blake, and it's told very well, condensing several sourcebooks worth of material into the essentials. I really enjoyed the overall presentation of it. It is a great cataclysm, and it is displayed as such. It's a great fall not only for the Word of Blake, but for everyone. There aren't many narrative offshoots in this section too, beyond things being added mostly for clarity, and not counting the Wars of Reaving, another cataclysm that took place around the same time. While this era isn't one of my personal favorites, I very much felt this piece did it justice, and put on the best possible face for it, all while providing all the context and information anyone would need to descend into the madness of this contentious time period. But I will say, we can only all hope that Blake's light will shine upon us all again. I enjoyed this section of the book. Rumors and legends of their survival persist to this day. The Word of Blake may yet await their time of vengeance under the light of some far-off star. In the past few years, the Republic has been on a slow, steady slide towards the edge of an abyss. The catalyst for this slide was the loss of the hyperpulse generator network, and thus the loss of interstellar communications, lifeblood of any star-spanning nation. During this time of trials and tribulations, we have all witnessed the best and worst that everyone, anyone, citizen or resident, peerage or proletariat, had to offer. We found greatness and frailty. We discovered new allies, new enemies, and the depths of our own resolve to take a new and strong hand in our own lives, our futures, and our destinies. And if there was a failure, it was our failure. The failures of those of us entrusted to safeguard Devlin Stone's great legacy. There is nothing more to say, nothing more to endeavor, that we have not said or attempted in the last 10 months. So, it is with great sorrow but firm resolve that we put to you, the people of the Republic of the Sphere, that the time has come for drastic and irrevocable action, and formally dissolve the Republic of the Sphere. Excerpts from Jonah Levin's final address, 1st of October, 3135. The Dark Age is the longest-standing era of Battletech, and honestly may have the most written about it, in novel and sourcebook formats combined. While this may be hard to believe for many, it was the era which acquired new fiction, at various rates of production of course, for essentially 20 years. While that was undoubtedly a time that had some rough patches, I will say overall, this section of the book, when factoring that in, does feel short. There are a limited number of pages, and of course the writers can't allow themselves to be bogged down in too many distractions, but this particular chapter is essentially 10 pages long, which is slightly shorter than the Blakist Era. Admittedly, it doesn't try to explain as many things beyond the Republic itself, the state that personified the Dark Age. However, it is without a doubt still something that makes me a little sad all the same. Still, the table needs to be set for the Dark Age, and this section summarizes it quickly and effectively, describing the time of peace that Devlin Stone and his Republic ushered in, until the collapse of the HPG network on Grey Monday. What follows is an examination, really, at its core, as to who the Republic was, and does so almost through the lens of knighthood within the Inner Sphere. Knights were the best of what Stone's Republic of the Sphere had to offer. What remains of this chapter is truthfully the dark days of the Inner Sphere, where the wars between the houses and clans are reignited, and with it culminating in the death of Comstar, and then the death of the Republic. There are also short biographies really focused on 3 of the key house characters: Liao Denai, Kurita Yori, and Julian Davian. With all of this said, however, when it comes down to it, without getting too deep into the details, the Dark Age's time in the sunlight is short compared to the volume of stories written within it. But it is not wholly deprived. The key events are all there, though I will say, I can't help but sense that this section does feel less populated than other major eras. But what more could be put there, without just expanding on the events discussed? Did those events need more details? Some perhaps required a little more, but by and large the chapter does do everything required of it to open the door for new players, or anyone finding interest in the lore enough to procure this book, even if someone who is more familiar with the setting might find this particular section a bit sparse.
All the worlds of the Empire are mine. All the worlds of the Inner Sphere and beyond. We are the Ilclan and the Star League, and all will be ours. Today, or tomorrow, and forever.
Ilclan Alaric Ward, communique from Terra to the Wolf Empire, received on Guyana, 4th of June, 3152. There is but a fragment of the history side of this book dedicated to this, that being the newest era of Battletech, and understandably so. The Ilclan Era is relatively new, and still ongoing. Really, this section is almost an overview of the current status of the Inner Sphere as of 3152, and the events of Hour of the Wolf, as well as what occurred around it. It gives an idea about the key players, at least within the clans, and gives somewhat of an indication towards the great houses too. There are a pair of biographies covering Malvina Hazen and Alaric Ward, the 2 principal warriors who fought over the Ilclan ship, as well as a section about currencies, now within the Inner Sphere.
Every tabletop wargame has factions for the most part, and Battletech is no different in this respect. While mech designs may be a bit looser in terms of rosters than some other systems, nonetheless these narrative groups make up the real titans of the setting. The history of Battletech really matters due to these organizations, and the characters within them. Much like tackling the history of this great franchise, I'm going to be talking about this section in broader terms. So, let's get into it. Though 8 centuries have passed since those words found utterance on the page, they are more applicable now than ever before. As we expand our realms and the distances between the stars lengthens exponentially, what better way to ensure the prosperity of the people than to establish a new neo-feudalistic order, one that leaves the weaknesses in the past and embraces the best of such governance for the future. We will forge a dynasty that leads to prosperity, despite difficulties and any distances amongst the heavens. Lord Michael Cameron, Preamble to the Cameron Edict, 2351. The 5 great houses are the center of Battletech, and really always have been. While entities like Comstar, the Periphery, and even the clans have taken up residence and played important roles in the widest part of the setting, inevitably it all comes back to the 5 great families that run their feudal realms. These are the first factions documented in universe, and each is given a very generous overview. To start, the order with which these factions are observed are House Davian, the Federated Sons,
House Kadita, the Draconis Combine. House Liao, the Capellan Confederation. House Merrick, the Free Worlds League. And House Steiner, the Lyran Commonwealth. Each of these houses is explored through several lenses. First, they are given a historical overview that is more centered on the house itself, really going from the founding of said feudal state, all the way through to the current era of Battletech. This isn't where things end, and one of the parts of each of these that I really enjoyed the most is universe then turns towards the culture of each of these houses, giving an idea as to the values and customs of the people who live within these space empires. Goals come next, really giving an insight into the concerns of the government and elites of each of the successor states, mostly focused towards their immediate and even long-term concerns. The final piece of each of these breakdowns is what is normally a full page for each great house called the future. This last portion seems to indicate where things may be headed for each of these realms. Overall, when taking everything into account, as a whole, I really think this thing worked.
We will purge our old ideals and ethics. Those belong to the corrupt stars of the inner sphere, and will not serve as we begin anew. Now, while our minds are open and yearning for new insight, we must remold them and fill them with the truth of our destiny, for we are destined not only to be different from those we left behind, but also better. My father knew this, and saved us from the Holocaust of the inner sphere. I accepted his truth, and have returned to lead you, the survivors of this most bitter trial.
Nicholas Kerensky to his loyalists on Stranomechdi, 2802. As you can probably guess, the second most important grand set of factions within this setting are of course the clans, and they are represented in this by having the second longest section written about them, and by having their primary factions put on display in a very similar way to the great houses within this book. It is worth noting, however, that the clans that do get write-ups of significance here are clans currently alive and active during the current era. Homeroll clans like Staradder, or dead clans like Novacat, while they do get their own small microsections, aren't given anything like the attention of the primaries within. Much as I did with the great houses, the main clans and the order they are displayed in are the Ilclan, Clan Wolf, Clan Jade Falcon, Clan Smoke Jaguar, the Rosselhague Dominion, Clan Hell's Horses, Clan Seafox, the Raven Alliance, and the Scorpion Empire. After these, all receive their time in the sun. The difference in this area of the book as compared to the houses is that for the most part these write-ups are slightly smaller, and they amalgamate their sections into fewer categories. History, goals, culture, and the future all kind of end up together, in other words. And it makes sense. There are more clans than houses, and clans aren't quite as complex, barring perhaps Jade Falcon, Ghost Bear, and Wolf. And even then, I don't think their histories are quite as deep as the houses here either. Regardless, the reader is not deprived by any of these in my opinion, especially since its focus is on, truthfully, supported factions. In fact, it was very nice seeing write-ups on Hell's Horses and Snowraven, as these clans have traditionally been very much underserved, and it gives me hope that they'll be getting more thorough explorations into the future. Ah, the Periphery. A place where people imagine that they are free. But, jokes aside, there is a dedicated narrative cubicle. It is also the only faction subchapter that has its own write-up, simply called The Periphery, to give an explanation as to what it is. It has a rather Mad Max-inspired woman who looks really malicious and perhaps psychotic on the page where this write-up takes place. The explanation put here is really a rundown of what the Periphery has been through, and why it is, often, the way it is. It's a great generalist piece, and helps contextualize the next segments to come. The Periphery nations that specifically get addressed and get write-ups are the Magistracy of Canopus, the Marian Hegemony, and the Taurian Concordat and Calderon Protectorate. Unlike the great houses and clans, while each nation does get a decent display in regards to their culture, history, and status, it is unified into a single piece each, that spreads typically over several pages. It does also end the section with an insightful minor world segment, and a piece on the deep Periphery.
Look on the bright side, kid. You get to keep all the money.
Unnamed dropship captain to the sole survivor of Team Venom. 3044. The Mercenaries, perhaps the most beloved single part of the setting, and this area is filled with the most notable military units in the entirety of the franchise. And there is a reason why they were given their own dedicated component in the factions reviewed in this book. While it does mention many mercenary units near the end with their own page spread, more or less tons of mid-tier and high-tier units that have appeared in the setting over the last 4 decades, there are individual analysis pages for the main, big-time, private military corporations. The units that if they were mercs in Night City in Cyberpunk 2077 would be considered legends. So, who are the super merc units who get the direct light shined on them in this? The last component in this tome that is Battletech Universe. The Wolf's Dragoons, the Eridani Lighthorse, the Kellhounds, the Grey Death Legion, the Northwind Highlanders, the 21st Centauri Lancers, and Hansen's Rough Riders. For the mercs, each of their sections tend to be a bit on the shorter side, and that's absolutely okay. Each has their histories documented, giving an idea as to just who these people are. It's a perfect way to end the book, and a perfect way for me to go into my final thoughts. Well, that was quite an adventure, wasn't it? We covered the layout, art, history, intention of the product, and the factions they observed within. All without me turning this just into an audiobook. It was great just talking about what you can expect. But what are my final thoughts on it? I know some of my language here gave it away, but I, as a whole, really appreciated this very enjoyable, informative, and dare I say exceptional textbook on what Battletech is at its very heart. There's a great deal of care that went into crafting it, and clearly a lot of consideration on what was necessary and what was not. For the historical side of the book, I thought the Star League era was superbly handled, as was the Succession Wars. I loved the tie-ins of various important write-ups about individuals, technologies, events, and even factions. The Clan Invasion was another excellent rundown too, and once again goes over not only the events, but much of the important things around the era, or that could be attached to it. The FedComp Civil War and Blakist Era both have great explorations as well, and I should say, Universe goes as far as to make these eras shine in ways that some of their prior materials have struggled to before, just digging into their main events and going with it and not getting lost in some of their eccentricities. Of all of these eras, the only one I think I can level any real criticism towards was the Dark Age, and again, only because it just feels short for how long the Dark Age was. Some of its information is further explained in the Ilclan Era, and it does work. No one will be left in figurative lore poverty, or be truly deprived, as the chapter really does go over the fall of the Republic, but it felt like it needed something more than what it had. Now, to get to the factions portion of the book, I think it was handled really well, as I felt all of them were given the attention that each nation or group was due. And it's a superb idea to help players find their way into the mainstream factions of the setting, letting them connect with groups that they find the coolest, basically. Comstar and the Word of Blake were left out of this area, but they are, unfortunately, dead or in exile in the main era of the game at the moment. And the clear objective was to make this section about factions that will matter going forwards, at least for now. It is noteworthy, at least, that the Blakists do get coverage, just outside of the faction section of the book, at least. In totality, new players will be exceptionally well served by this book. I really do mean that. This is the best jump-in point for understanding the fiction that any new player can ask for, and after reading it, you could pick up another source book or a novel and not be lost, or at the very least it will feel like you have a narrative compass with you. A story I'd heard is that Randall Bills handed a copy of this very particular product to Ray Arastia, Ray being the current Battletech line developer for CGL, and is someone who did an enormous amount of work on this project, and informed him that this would be the book he would be remembered for. I wholly concur. Ray and his team have put an incredible amount into this particular book. This was crafted with consideration, care, and a clear love for the setting. While yes, each era is not as detailed as their expansive dedicated campaigns or sourcebooks, each era is nonetheless the best they can be, almost to a T, within the perspective that this book offers, even when taking into account my mild criticisms of the Dark Age. So, do I recommend this? Yes, I absolutely do recommend it. Anyone who wants to get into the fiction or the lore of Battletech will be exceptionally well served by this book. If you are already into the fiction and are a long-time veteran, my recommendation is a bit softer. If you want something where there is a general understanding of things all in one place, it's great. The only thing I'll add is that faction sections seem to give some sneak peeks into some of the things they're intending for various states and organizations in the Ilclan Era, but it is left vague enough that they leave a lot to the imagination, we'll say. But there we have it. The review for Battletech Universe, the Standard Edition. Surely there cannot be more to said video. Now we see the special edition of Battletech Universe known as the Precentor Martial Edition. It is what you should probably be seeing on the screen now. It was made for the Mercenaries Kickstarter, and unlike the normal Battletech Universe book, this one won't be arriving at retail. I thought it important to talk about this, for really one reason. No, it's not the blueprints that came with it, or the really cool cutouts that exist within the special edition version of the book, which is really well crafted, I should add. I love the cover too. But it is about the additional book that comes with it, which is only going to be a part of these as far as I know. It's called Battletech: The Remembrance. It's hard to come entirely to words about it. It is about the huge number of creators who appear in this book, offering their own insights on the franchise they've worked on for decades, or even created. There are too many creatives to count, but it has pieces written by the majority of important people who have worked on Battletech over the last 40 years. From its creators, through to most of the game's line developers, and many of its authors, writers, and artists. Of course, it includes those who are currently working on the property as well. I'll say reading through each of them, there was a sense of history about it, but also a sense of humanity too. So many of them wrote about their experiences working with other people while being attached to the setting, and everyone was thankful for their time with the property. I don't want to delve too deeply into this, but the remembrance, to me, is really a part of Battletech as a whole. It reflects the people who made it, capturing in this moment and time their sincere thoughts. And it is thoughts on something that was really very much a part of their lives. something they put to page or into the world in other ways. I think we often forget all of these games, or movies, or anything fictional that we read about or interact with, are a part of the mind's eye of creative people. It is a part of their lives that they give others to enjoy. If the Precentor Martial Edition becomes available either on the CGO web store or at conventions, this portion is what really justifies having it. Beyond its crisp appearance, the talking box that contains all of it, and the excellent blueprints. This small edition definitely moved me when reading where Battletech came from, the minds of those who crafted it. This was a very important piece, in my opinion. This was in and of itself as insightful, but more moving than Battletech Universe itself. You know, there's an interesting bonus here for everyone, because I had the opportunity to reach out to a few of the people who were involved with crafting this particular tome. More specifically, Ray Arastia and Randall Bills. I checked with them and I was able to ask them a series of questions over email. First, I want to thank them for entertaining me in this respect, as they did indeed answer my questions, and I'm going to be providing them here for all of you as the finale to this long-standing review. I was originally just going to modulate my voice when reading their particular answers, but instead I reached out to two other content creators who will be providing the voices for these two creatives in their written answers. So, to our two guest voices on this video, I give you guys the floor. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Critical Rocket. I run a YouTube channel that's been making Battletech lore-based videos for about 8 or so years now, along with streaming other games with friends. Big Red has asked me to step in to read the answers for Ray Arastia.
Hello, I'm Mechanical Frog. You likely know me as YouTube's #1 hip-hop country fusion Battletech content creator. However, when Big Red yells jump, I say, hey, that's on brand, and hop right over. Today, I'll be lending my voice to Randall Bills as he tackles Red's tough questions for Battletech Universe.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Check out both of their channels when this is all done. I'll have links in the video description. Well, I went through the entire book, twice, and it's been a great walk down memory lane, and I greatly appreciated it. We're going to be starting with Ray's portion of this, so first of all, I'm going to ask the most obvious question. Just for those who are watching this who aren't aware of who you are. But, who are you, and what do you do for CGL?
I'm Ray Arastia, the line developer of Battletech. I work with the awesome Battletech staff and freelance team to manage and plan the product line and storyline for Battletech.
On to question 2. The one that really gets things going here in terms of the book and overall product itself. But what was your specific involvement with Battletech Universe?
The Universe book was originally planned to bookend the Total Warfare core line in 2007, before it eventually expanded into a series of 9 books. In the initial planning for the Clan Invasion Kickstarter, I suggested that we revive Universe and offer it as part of the Kickstarter. I was talked off that particular ledge, but began to work on the book uncoupled from the Kickstarter. It was the initial editing pass by Catherine Monteserio, who was new to Battletech at the time, that really opened my eyes to that fact. What followed as a result was about 2 years of rewriting and a series of additional writing and artwork as we sought to make the book accessible by both new and old fans alike.
What was the most difficult thing about working on the book? I can tell there was obviously a lot of care and effort put into it, but I can also imagine there were a lot of difficulties on tackling a project like this, especially one that I think both you and I would agree is really important to the future of the line's fiction.
The most difficult part of the book was approaching Battletech with fresh eyes, from the perspective of someone completely unfamiliar with the franchise. From myself, Aaron Cale, the assistant line developer, to the book's managing developer Jeff Swift, to all the authors involved. They're also firmly entrenched in the material and used to writing to an audience familiar to Battletech to the extent that we're not even aware of that.
Is there anything you really wanted to add that just couldn't fit into the book? Or was too much of a detour from Universe's mission goal?
Oh, a lot. But off the top of my head, I wanted to add a running bibliography, suggested reading of fiction and sourcebooks in the margins that relate to the page's corresponding text.
What was your favorite part of working on the book?
The teamwork. This work was so massive that I felt the camaraderie here more than any other project. Working with Lyran, Randall and Aaron, and being revitalized every time they reacted to updates. Working with Brent Evans, Anthony Scroggins, the CGL art director and Battletech art director respectively, and the art staff on the incredible images that fill the book. Jeff Swift and all the contributing authors, Catherine, the book's primary editor, Mark Riggleman, and Joshua Perrian, Battletech line editor and author respectively, to expand the shape of the book into what it became, and collaborating with David Kerber and Mark Hayden on the layout and graphic design on the book. Not to mention reaching and speaking with all the past Battletech contributors and collecting their thoughts on working and shaping Battletech of the past 4 decades.
It might be the same answer, but being able to look at the finished book now, what was your personal favorite part? Or even element of it? In other words, what do you enjoy about the book most as a reader yourself?
Just the fact that it exists. It's hard to appreciate the enormity of the work that went into it.
What was the biggest surprise you had when working on Universe? Either as a lore factoid or something you didn't expect.
Just how many open spaces there are in the lore that we filled in with our individual and collective headcanon. The book provided an opportunity to fill in a tiny fraction of those that we may not have otherwise been able to.
Question 8, we're doing it. Here's a dangerous one. Was there anything in this 280-page monster that almost didn't make it in? That you recall, of course, and why?
The Remembrance. It was a very large project and took a lot of work, but we were able to salvage it and make it happen by producing it as a separate book within the Precentor Marshall edition.
What do you hope fans and new players take away from this book most?
That they have a concise, gorgeous source for the Battletech universe to have and to share, to serve as the foundation for everything to come in the next 40 years, and to serve as an endless starting point for all the rabbit holes that they can go down and enjoy in Battletech lore.
Alright, final question. Is there a message out there you'd like to leave everyone about this book, or to the Battletech audience in general? This is clearly a huge milestone for the property, so I think it's important to really give you the floor, at least for a moment.
I can quote the dedication I wrote in the book. To all the fans and contributors of Battletech past and present, thank you for all your love, support, and good times over the years. To all those fans and contributors yet to come, discovering Battletech for the first time, this book is for you. And I will simply add, I'm simultaneously humbled and proud and eternally grateful to have played a small part in it all. Thank you.
With all of that, it is now time to get to the second part of the interview. Mr. Bills, I have a few questions for you, and to my knowledge, you were the one most behind the Precentor Marshall edition. For the sake of the audience that may be new, question 1 is, of course, who are you? And what role do you currently have with Battletech?
My name is Randall Bills, and I'm the creative director at Catalyst Game Labs. Currently, I work with the brilliant team of Ray, Aaron, Brent, Anthony, and John to develop Battletech's games and storyline. Most of the time, I work in that macro capacity, helping from the 10,000-foot view. But then I dive in to develop projects as needed. My latest two being the Alpha Strike and Mercenaries box sets.
I know you've been involved with the franchise, making it, for basically as long as I've been playing it, which is really insane for me to think about, so I'm going to choose to stop doing that right now. So with all of that said, what was your personal favorite part of the core retail version of the Battletech Universe sourcebook?
Yep. I've been playing Battletech for 38 years and working on it professionally for 28 in nearly every capacity. So I've become the de facto face of Battletech. And while every now and then all the gray reminds me of that age, usually I'm so humble and grateful that I still get to work on this game and universe that's been part of my life for 4 decades, and that I still love it all. As for the favorite part of the retail version, oof, that's tough. So much to love. But ultimately I think the best part is the balance that Ray struck, and all the kudos in the world to Ray for his magnum opus here, between the text to cover the details of the universe without bogging down into too much detail, and then that extra room we didn't devote to text that is filled with more art per page than almost any gaming book I can name. It's just a joy to flip through its pages.
I think a special edition version of the book was almost guaranteed, but what made you guys want to make the Precentor Martial Edition specifically?
Being a game developer, creative director, especially on a well-loved IP that goes back decades, it's a lot like being a fiction anthology editor. Ultimately, when you grab that anthology of fiction, you are embracing what that editor loves, and they hope you will love it in return. So while I must always balance the business side of things, ultimately I'm just one of the biggest Battletech fans on the planet. And so this is a product wanted. A product that would live up to that 40-year legacy. In other words, to my mind, Battletech deserved nothing less than the crazy of this Precentor Martial Edition. And my hope is the same love I have as a fan, if you're watching my unboxing videos where I giggle at the sound module, will be reciprocated by the community as they get their hands on it.
Why did you guys decide that the box that it all goes in needs to talk?
That was actually a suggestion that Lyran first tossed out, and we all laughed at the absurdity of it, but it sparked the idea in me that yeah, we just had to. To this day, Mechwarrior 2 remains one of the best-selling computer games in history. Millions of people heard that startup sequence endlessly. Also, in my opinion, it has wonderfully stood the test of time, where it is just as cool sounding now as it was 3 decades ago. And so, when you open the box, whether an old player or brand new, that sound instantly immerses you in this universe and prepares you to experience what's in the box.
Probably the most serious question I have for you is because I've read through the Remembrance, which I think is really the heart and soul of the Precentor Martial Edition. You've known many of the people who've left their mark on Battletech, and known a lot of them over the years. Were you at all surprised by the responses anyone gave to what Battletech meant to them? Genuinely. From writers, to authors, to creators, to artists, and everything in between, you could sense just how important the game and world of Battletech meant to all of these incredible people. I dare say it was unexpectedly emotional, much of the time even.
That is the heart of it, absolutely. And yeah, when you've been doing it this long, you just, well, know nearly everyone. There's an institutional knowledge baked into me, and I'm happy to share constantly. That 15-year-old pimply-faced teenager that first picked up the game could never have possibly dreamed that across the lifetime of working with the most amazing creative people, much less this brilliant community I've been a part of all over the world, that I'd also be at the heart of one of the biggest universes gaming has created. And so as Ray and I reviewed the incoming responses, multiple moments of tearing up. As I realized that so many people had the same experience that I did, that I was in a position to bring their emotional touchstones to life in a way the entire community can share. Even as I type this, I think across the whole experience, I can still feel those incredible emotions.
With the book being completed in both of its forms, and preparing to ship to wider audiences in the case of the core book, and to the backers who ordered the Precentor Martial Edition, with all of the work that's went into these books, what do you hope fans and new players take away from Universe most?
I hope the community has an ever greater passion for Battletech, a passion that's that much easier to experience at your gaming tables, and more importantly, a passion that's all the easier to share with those around you. The single most important moment for the tabletop of the last 2 decades, in my opinion, was the evolution of the mech's illustrations and the publications of new plastics back in 2018 as part of the new A Game of Armored Combat and Beginner box. This universe book, then, is the second most important moment.
Final question. It's the same one I tossed towards Ray. Is there a message out there you'd like to leave everyone about this book? Or to the Battletech audience in general? This is clearly a huge milestone for the setting, so I think it's really important that I give you the same opportunity I gave Ray, and give the floor to you.
What a great question. Thinking about it some, I believe what I hope they take away is the love and respect we have for Battletech and by extension for this community. As many will know, I'm currently on a world tour this year. In fact, mid-May I'll leave and won't be back for 6 weeks, hitting chunks of Europe and then Canada, 5 countries, 5 event weekends, over a dozen stores, and it's because I want to thank as many of this community as possible. Thank them for being part of this journey that has meant so much to me and my family, and to share the stories of how much it has meant to all of you as well. Grab a book, roll some dice, blow up a mech. It's a glorious time to be a Battletech fan.
Once again, I'd like to thank Ray and Randall for taking the time to answer my questions. This is the part of the video where I would normally do an outro. However, I have something I think is more special to leave you all with. Just before I do, this is a quick reminder that Battletech Universe will be out this year. It sounds like sometime between the summer and fall. I do hope you all enjoyed my review of Battletech Universe. Lauren, Randall, and I go back a long way, and the pair of them often ask me uncomfortably personal questions, usually in front of Battletech fans. This question is no exception because Battletech is very personal to me. The football legend Peel once said, "Football's been very good to me." And the same is true for how important Battletech has been to me, my family, and my career. FASA started by publishing Starship deck plans and eventually adventures for the game Travelers from Game Design's Workshop. With Mark Miller's support, it proved a great launching platform for our little game company. Our first 2 original games were a World War II role-playing game called Behind Enemy Lines, and a board game about a slightly tongue-in-cheek science fiction sport called Gravball. The 2 games did well enough to move FASA forward as a real game publisher, and we started looking for what game would come next. At a hobby industry trade show, I ran into an importer who had a ton of small-scale robot models based upon Japanese anime, which I thought looked really cool. Securing a license to use the images, I set about creating a fictional universe for them to exist in, and we set about developing a game system to bring that world to the tabletop. For 1982, the game design was considered relatively elegant with some nice mechanics. But I think the most innovative thing we did was take the rich storytelling approach of role-playing games and apply it to a board game. The depth of Battletech fiction from the initial rulebook to the technical readouts, the faction sourcebooks, the campaign books, and of course the novels all contributed to creating a world which lived in our heads for many more hours than it was on our kitchen tables. For many of us, it's a story that has never left our heads and our hearts. Battletech propelled FASA to becoming a major publisher in the adventure games market, as it was called then, and provided me the platform and resources to explore and innovate in every kind of game and interactive storytelling conceivable. Without Battletech, there would be no Shadowrun. Without Battletech and Shadowrun, we would not have the funds to develop and launch the Battletech Center, the world's first multiplayer virtual reality simulator center. The Battletech Center was my baptism by fire into the world of hardware and software development, and it launched me into a 30-year career in virtual reality, video games, alternate reality games, transmedia storytelling, and most recently augmented reality development. Along the way, I became creative director for the launch of Xbox, a Walt Disney Imagineer, and CEO of more startups than I can quickly count. Battletech has brought me together with amazing creative collaborators across a dizzying array of professions to envision and create technologies, games, stories, places, and experiences, all of which, successful or not, added something new to the world for people to enjoy and build upon. But most importantly, Battletech introduced me to a legion of players and fans, all of whom brought their creativity, kindness, and energy to the game, to the fiction, to the community, and to each other. The stories of their games and their accomplishments have brought smiles to my face for decades, and I hope always will. What's Battletech to me? With exception to my wife and my kids, it's been the most important relationship in my life. Over the last 35 years, every time I've had the opportunity to work in the universe, I find something new to engage me. It inspires me, to challenge me, and I hope that I have the honor of continuing to contribute for many more years to come. Jordan Weissman, FASA co-founder, Battletech co-creator. From Battletech, The Remembrance, first entry, page 3.